Welcome to the Conservation Tribe. I'm your host, Blaine Edwards, aka Earth Offline, and in today's episode, we're talking about orangutans. And we're doing this with the help of today's guest, Dea. So, Dea, thank you for coming on the show, and welcome to the Conservation Tribe.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Okay, so I am called Dea. I'm from the UK. I'm 24, a zoologist, and now wildlife filmmaker. And it's one of those things which, when people ask what do you do right now, having just finished up this master's in wildlife filmmaking, it's kind of all a bit over the place. You know, got these passions in one place and interests in another. But I would say that generally speaking, I'm an environmental and orangutan advocate.
Environmental and orangutan advocate. I like that. Admirable.
Basically, yeah, I mean, there's just combining a lot of things right now, so I feel like that's the most general way. But I mean, there's a few other things that I do. So there's a organization based actually in Australia called Orangutan Alliance, and I'm the UK correspondent for them. Mm-hmm. So probably a better correspondent if I can actually say the word. But
hey, it's a hard word to say. Don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah, thanks. But no, at the moment, focusing more on film linked to orangutans.
Okay, so you mentioned that you did your master's in wildlife filmmaking.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
It was one of those things that I very much came from a science background, having studied zoology. And I'm sure I can talk about this later, but the route I got into to then going and working and living with orangutans the year after, it got to a point where I definitely wanted to go and do a master's to really focus more specifically on primates and orangutans when it comes to zoology. But what I couldn't decide at that moment was whether I wanted to pursue something that was like a master's that's research-based or one that was more wildlife filmmaking. Mm-hmm. And the thing that really drew me to that, which then ended up being the reason that I pursued that way, was that it wonderfully weaves together art and science. I think film, particularly wildlife and conservation filmmaking, is a great tool for communicating sometimes complex, sometimes quite upsetting, sometimes often crucial information and research that everyone really needs to know about because it impacts everybody's lives. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that information is lost, or people feel that information is not relevant to them, or they can't relate to it when it's just in a journal. Mm-hmm. So film is a wonderful way to creatively express those things and it's storytelling at the end of the day. And we communicate the way that we cooperate, everything, the way that we process information always comes back to storytelling. So it's a powerful tool and one that I've loved getting to understand more and being involved with over the last few years.
Mm-hmm. So have you finished your master's degree with wildlife?
Yeah, I finished that at the end of last year, and then now I'm focusing more on a orangutan film.
It's interesting you say the intersection of art and conservation, because in my 2 episodes ago, I did an episode with Pooja, who's a multimedia artist, and her work is heavily linked with conservation, and it's all about, storytelling and how important that is. And through her medium, she uses film, but she also uses painting, illustration. She uses the whole lot, really. But using those mediums to convey a meaningful scientific message. And it's all well and good doing all the research, but if you can't communicate that research in a way that people are receptive to or want to consume even, then it's obviously not pointless, but it doesn't have the potential impact that it could have if it was presented in a way through film or. Yeah, I think if that makes sense, it's really important, the creative space and communicating your message is really important.
It comes with a certain responsibility. I know from my experience personally that I've lived out in Borneo. I've seen the impacts of deforestation of palm oil, I've been able to encounter these incredible species that obviously then, I had a long sort of admiration for this species and the habitat in the first place. But when you're able to experience something, you're definitely going to care. Like, I can't imagine that anyone who has encountered an orangutan or has been in those forests with the layers of sound and the tea-colored water can't care about it. But it's ridiculous to expect that. I mean, I had a huge privilege that I was able to do that, and thus I feel I have a responsibility in communicating what is going on, because it does impact every single one of us. And the main thing that I find, we can talk about it a bit later on, but I work also as a STEM ambassador. So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are the subjects that are hugely underrepresented. As the years in schools go on, there seems to be a greater drop of people who pursue them for studying, but then also in careers or even just having an interest in those subjects. And they're ones that are crucial for conservation and positive change to the climate and things. And something that I feel really strongly is that science should never, ever, ever feel like it's just for scientists. So when people are like, oh, but I'm not a scientist, it's not really, no, that's wrong. Science is part of every single person's daily life.
It's nature. That's what it is. It's the attempt to describe the natural world. Intriguing,
and when those things happen, I feel like you get people to care, and when people care, then that's when you get behavior changes and attitude changes.
Totally agree. You need them to care. You need them. You protect what you love. The part that you mentioned about the experiences part, I found really interesting. The idea that if you actually see an orangutan or any animal in the wild, it's very difficult once you have that experience not to have some kind of emotional connection with that animal. So what are your thoughts on, I'm kind of veering off script a bit,
so fine.
But kind of ecotourism and volunteering, these experiences where you're right there in the real world, the tangible world. What are your thoughts on that? Like, I'm a big believer in ecotourism and the potential benefit that it could have for conservation moving forward, because you can get that meaningful experience with an animal that could then inspire you to care about it and ultimately want to protect it. Whereas if you didn't have that experience, let's say you just were watching a film or reading about it, it misses that extra factor because you're disconnected still somewhat from it.
I think my opinion on that is one that in an ideal world, I don't think ecotourism would be the solution. In an ideal world, we have to fill that industry. I've seen firsthand the impacts of when orangutans, being so closely related to humans, have caught like common colds, ones that, or stomach bugs, and it's sometimes been fatal. So I think there's a really fine line. I think education through ecotourism is crucial. I think ecotourism, as opposed to land being used for, like land use change and deforestation, if it's a way to maintain the habitat that's there, as you said, to inspire people, to connect people to what's there, so in turn they're going to care and want to do what they can, that is a positive. But I think what has to be implemented is respect for the animal at a distance.
At a distance, 100%.
Because when that doesn't happen, I was out working in Borneo for almost 9 months, and before I did that, I had to have a rigorous quarantine period. I had to have tests for all these different, a TB test or various tests, and I think that had that not happened, it wouldn't have been appropriate, because, as I said, it's so easy to swap over illnesses, which could be devastating. So I think if a distance is maintained, then ecotourism is good. But I do also think that some forms of storytelling can be so powerful that sometimes they do give you that connection. So, for example, there's a documentary called My Life as a Turkey. And I always use this one as an example because it follows the story of a man who hand rears these turkeys up until they're adults.
Yeah.
And you think before, it's going to be quite sweet, maybe quite funny. By the end of this film, you are wholly connected to these turkeys. And, you're crying because it's not really that they're turkeys and you have to love a turkey. It's more that what those turkeys represent. When I watch it, I think of when, my brother went to university and that sense of loss, or when someone else watches it, they might think of when they left for 6 months to go traveling, or when their daughter left, or that feeling of that one time where da-da-da. And with each person, it creates a personal attachment, like a way that they can relate to that story. Not that it's to do with Turkey, but that feeling internally on a personal level, which I do think sticks with you. And that's so powerful about when you encounter these animals firsthand, is that you've got a tangible sort of connection there and then. But with some use of storytelling, I do think it can
have
give you that
same effect.
Yeah, maybe in a different form, but some power with it as well.
Totally. And I think, it's more important than ever now, telling a story that has value to the rest of the world as well. There's a lot of, through social media, we're just bombarded with all this information and stories, I guess, or more or less just information of things that, don't have a lot of substance to it. And I think that is the challenge of people like yourself and creatives that are involved in conservation or the environment or human rights and all those kind of fields, to kind of break through that noise through the power of storytelling to tell a story that's worth hearing.
Yeah.
So let's rewind a bit to orangutan conservation and kind of, was there a moment that inspired you was there a moment where you're like, this is what I want to do. I want to dedicate my life to conservation and orangutans. Was there a moment, or was it kind of like a gradual transition?
So I think there were probably two things that really have stuck with me. One that's been sort of a moment, and another was just a sequence of events that have happened over the years. So the first was, I've loved orangutans ever since I was about 6 or something. But there was a particular moment when I was younger where I heard the story of, though the pioneering woman was Birute Galdikas with orangutans, the other trimate, Jane Goodall, there was a story of when she was observing some orangutans in the wild, and the story went that there was an adult female up in a tree, and she misjudged her weight, which is quite rare, and the tree couldn't support her weight and crashed down, and she fell from quite some height down to the ground. And the female proceeded to pick up that branch, climb up, and many other animals at this point would show aggression, sort of frustration, or emotions similar to those human emotions. But instead, she proceeded to try and attach the branch back onto the tree.
Wow.
And that just sums up orangutans so well. They're so in harmony with their environment. They're so generally so calm. I mean, in the Dayak indigenous people of Kalimantan, which is Indonesian Borneo, were totally, they believe that orangutans can speak, they can talk, they can understand, but they choose not to because fear of being enslaved or having to be put to work. And I mean, I
understand
totally,
us humans, or they?
They're, it's sort of widespread agreed, at least in myths anyway, that orangutans had the ability to talk, but they chose not to. And even their name, orangutan in Malay, means person of the forest, and I can totally see that. And the fact that they're just so in harmony, so at peace in their surroundings is something that really drew me to them. And the second thing is for, ever since I was about 12, I've been working with children, whether that's teaching or volunteering or just having many younger siblings or anything like that. And this sort of innate curiosity of a child has been my biggest inspiration, because at some point when we grow up, that curiosity goes. And I think that's the biggest loss and the biggest thing one of the biggest things that we're missing out on with conservation. Because if you don't have curiosity, it's very hard to be interested in I don't know, I feel like curiosity is so key when thinking about the world around us, asking questions. And I listened to an amazing podcast about someone that was speaking about this and how things can shift from fear, for example, sharks, being scared of sharks, to then being curious about them. And then by looking at certain patterns on a shark, it then linked to some, I'm probably going to say it wrong, I can't remember, but basically what I'm trying to say is curiosity, I believe, is so important, and it's the reason why I pursued science, because it's nice to look around and know why certain things are the way they are, why orangutans do that, why is it that this or that and this and that. And I try in anything I do to retain that curiosity, particularly among children and teenagers and young adults, but also every age group. It's so essential that we have that curiosity. And so I think those two things are the big thing that inspired me with pursuing a science degree and then focusing more on orangutans and wildlife conservation.
Mm-hmm. So that story of that orangutan falling out of that tree because of the branch breaking, and then that is remarkable.
Yeah.
That's next level harmony with the natural environment.
I've got a lot of stories like that.
Yeah, I bet you do. So that, and then that curiosity.
Yeah,
I think that's super important because I'm a big believer in deep thinking. I love to just think, but I think it's important, and that goes hand in hand with curiosity. If you're curious, you start to think about things more, and it's hard not to be curious about the natural world or just everything around us if you have a bit of an open mind, because there's just so many things to be curious about. It's a crazy world out there, and we kind of block ourselves off from a lot of questions and a lot of experiences and thoughts because, I don't know, we're probably so set in how we should be operating our lives and the system and all that kind of stuff. So the orangutan species, so the Tapanuli orangutan, when people think of orangutans, usually they think of the Bornean and Sumatran species, but there's actually a third species.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that and kind of maybe how that was discovered and how they maybe differ from the other two species?
Yeah, so, I mean, this was hugely exciting. It was only a few years ago in 2017 that a third species of orangutan was discovered, or it was finally decided that this was an individual species. And I find, going back to the curiosity thing, the fact that we're in this day and age discovered a new species of animal, a mammal that shares almost 98% of its DNA with us just 2 years ago is huge. So the way that they kind of finalized that this was an individual species was looking at the skull. The Tapanuli orangutan's skull is somewhat smaller. But interestingly, this third species, well, I'll say a bit about it first. So it's the most endangered great ape. There's under 800 individuals left. And they are, their habitat is the Batang Toru forest, which is in Sumatra. And so they're all there in this area. And interestingly, so this area is in Sumatra, so you would think that they would look visually similar and somewhat closer related to the Sumatran orangutans. But actually, that's not the case. They're more similar to the Bornean orangutans. And the difference between the Bornean and the Sumatran, a major one, is that Sumatran orangutans have blonder kind of beards here. I think also the male and females tend to have beards, whereas the Bornean, they don't, and they don't have that blonde, lighter hair.
Okay.
Another interesting difference between the species is that in Borneo, where I lived, the Bornean orangutans don't really have any threats. I mean, you've got pit vipers and other snakes, but generally speaking, there's a lot less that threatens them in terms of predators.
And in terms of non-humans.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's a good part. Humans who are creating catastrophic damage, not just indirectly, but directly as well, with horrible, a number of bullets. Like, we'll get onto that later.
Yeah.
Apart from humans, there are some bears, but they kind of keep their own distance. Apart from snakes, Bornean orangutans can come to the ground, and whereas Tapanuli orangutans, they have the Sumatran tiger, so they don't come to the ground. And a group of researchers was studying the Tapanuli orangutans, and for 3,000 hours, the Tapanuli orangutans didn't come to the ground once. Whereas the Bornean orangutans, the ones that I was studying, the males, after a certain age, they get so big, the cheek padder dominant males, that they often are seen walking along the forest floor. And there's actually Dayak stories which say that they turn into ghosts because they can no longer support themselves in the trees, so they're just seen walking for miles and miles and miles on the forest floor, and their long hair on their arms gets all dreadlocked together and starts sort of, I don't know, I've always wanted to see that. It's quite a sort of a mysterious time, kind of quite elusive at that age. But yeah, so it was an interesting thing as well geologically, because of the Tapanuli orangutans looking more similar to the Bornean. And it goes back to when the orangutan species diverged. There were two major splits that took the orangutans from South Asia to Toba. And that was the first split. And then
where's Toba?
Toba is in Sumatra.
North?
Yes. Well, my geography is absolutely awful, but gosh, I'd have to look it up on a map.
We can look it up. We've got Google Maps. Tuba.
Okay,
Tuba.
So Toba. Toba. So that's in Sumatra. And the second split was over to Borneo. So that kind of gives you the Bornean orangutans. But at that time, with the ice ages, there was quite a lot of free movement between Toba and Borneo until Toba erupted. And the lava destroyed all of the forest around that area. So then that species there became completely isolated. They had no way of, reproducing with the other two separate groups. Mm-hmm. So that's why they then believed that the Tapanuli orangutan look and are more similar visually to the Bornean, because before the eruption, the areas were interchangeable, and there was some interspecies sort of, there was mating between the two, those two. But I mean, all of this is amazing, and there's huge amounts of excitement in discovering this. But what cannot really go ignored here is first how few there are left. And when I do talks at schools, I always say to the children, how many are you in this school? 1,000, or I don't know, however many. You can do it at work if you're listening and you're at work, or think of a train or anything like that. And then you think of 800 of those people in the assembly hall or in the canteen or on the bus or train. That is the entire population of this third species. And not only that, but there's a projected dam, hydroelectric dam and plantation that is set to be built that would obliterate the habitat, this last remaining bit. And I mean, there's a huge chance, a huge probability that it would put the species, would set it to be extinct soon after it's just been discovered.
Yeah, so the discovery 2017, amazing news. And now there's this dam proposal in Sumatra that has the potential to wipe out their population, really.
Yeah.
The Tapanuli orangutan population. So what is the status on that at the moment? Is it likely to go ahead? I know you've been involved in protests.
Yeah.
Have they had an impact on maybe deterring that from coming to fruition?
There are a few things that were quite big factors in this, and one that I would say with the protests and when I was encouraging children at schools to write letters. To give a bit of background, this hydroelectric dam would include an 8-mile tunnel. And if you think about the roads and the tunnels and the electricity wires, that fragmentation on the habitat is devastating, particularly as these orangutans, as we mentioned before, don't go to the ground, so they wouldn't be able to cross that way. If there's a massive gap between areas of forest, that's it, game over. They're not going to survive.
It's like just having a massive wall.
Yeah, exactly. A road in this equivalent is the equivalent of a wall.
Yeah. So an enclosure. It's an enclosure.
Yeah. And but the thing that I found quite interesting about this is, aside from looking at the orangutans, there are a lot of problems with this proposed dam. Firstly, there were reports that signatures were actually forged for this dam to go ahead. Secondly, there are huge risks of flooding from this hydroelectric dam later down in the course of this river, which would be devastating for the people that live and use this river nearby. And also, it would halt the migration of a fish. There's a really vital fish called the jurong fish.
The jurong fish.
Yeah, jurong fish. And so not only this, but what I found hugely powerful when we were protesting about this with this dam is that reasonably nearby there's a geothermal energy source that's already set up, and this geothermal plant, I suppose you'd call it, it's a geothermal project, does not affect orangutans whatsoever, and Sumatra already has an excess of electricity. So when you combine protesting against a certain thing for the impact that it's going to have, that's one thing. But to be able to provide the hard facts that it's really not worth it, you've got an alternative that you could expand at no cost to the orangutans, at no cost to this third rarest great ape. It set up a far more, I don't know what you're promising situation when I was protesting, I thought, because you provided an alternative. And I think that was, sorry, I got sidetracked. The outcome at the moment, following the protests, the Bank of China agreed to hold off from further development, and some meetings have gone ahead. I think in the recent weeks, a few more cracks have come to the surface about this proposed dam in terms of how certain issues have come up, which makes it even less admirable, even if you're not thinking about the conservation side of things.
Less admirable in terms of how it could affect the community, or are you talking about like it's not financially viable kind of stuff?
Not for on the side of China's Belt and Road project. So the Bank of China, for them, certain cracks have come in this proposed dam. So, for example, with the fact that the geothermal project is right there, the risk of the flooding, all of these things are actually showing that it's not as
there's better alternatives,
they thought, for an economic benefit.
Yeah, which is what it boils down to, really. So that's probably the biggest bargaining chip that you have, is trying to convince them that they'll earn more money by going down a different route.
Yeah, and I think it's a thing that's personally come up time and time again when you consider palm oil and you consider many different things linked to conservation. It is really important. One thing is getting people aware of an issue and getting people feeling it and wanting to do something, but it's also so important to provide a solution. And that is what I rack my brains over and over and over with, because
Very good point.
even with filmmaking, people watch a film and they're crying or they're so moved by it and they want to know what they can do. But
What now?
with palm oil, it's always this somewhat nebulous topic. It's not like plastic where you take a reusable coffee cup with you in the day, and using that, you have now had 365 less coffee cups into the ocean, or into the environment. With palm oil, it's more complex. There are more layers of there's more to it. It's not as clear cut. And I think that when you do address these things, if you can provide an alternative or a solution like this with the development of the geothermal project instead, that's huge. Because you're not just saying, no, stop this, forget all of that. No, don't care about those jobs. No, you're actually saying, this is the situation. This would be the outcome, but this is the alternative for you to consider.
And that's practical when you approach these problems, these issues, is if you disagree with option one, you're trying to convince them to go down a different route. You need to give them a reason to. They need to, you can't just say, this is wrong. Okay, see you later. You say, this is wrong because of this, but maybe if you go down this route, you can still earn X amount of dollars and we'll both be happy. So it's awareness of the threats, the issues, but also awareness of the solutions and alternatives. And I think that's one thing I'm trying to wrap my head more around is through trying to raise awareness, is not only bringing to light the things that are going wrong, but kind of what we can actually do as everyday human beings. What actions or what changes can we make? What micro changes can we make in order to mitigate those threats or to reduce them, minimize them? Okay, so we're talking about threats and but so in terms of orangutans and the ecosystem, what role, this is a question that I am always fascinated about, because when people say you should protect this species, a lot of them say, why? Like, what are they doing for us? So the question is, what role do orangutans play in their ecosystem? Like, why do they matter to the ecosystem?
So the two major things that I think about when it comes to orangutans and the ecosystem are the following. The first is, as I said before, Malay orangutan means person of the forest. But another thing that you could consider them as are gardeners of the forest. They have a very complex diet of bark, termites. There's over 317 different food sources that they consume. And in doing so, they have crazy amounts of knowledge of particular fruiting trees at certain times, the where these are located, and they are the key seed dispersers of the forest, from consuming the fruits and then basically the seeds being dispersed in their feces. But that's crucial for the survival and of the forest, which then in turn provides, photosynthesizes and provides the oxygen that we breathe. And the second thing that they do, the second major thing, is that every night orangutans, they're arboreal, so they spend the majority of the time up in the trees, unlike gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos. And in doing so, they create a new nest to sleep in every night. So this isn't just a mismatch, sort of like a crazy bunch of twigs. This is a carefully weaved together nest that has bent twigs, which in the dense canopy of a tropical forest, for example, in Borneo, sunlight very, very, very rarely penetrates through the canopy. So by orangutans every night making a new nest, they've broken branches which allows sunlight to come through. And photosynthesis, and sort of allow the young leaves and the young shoots to grow and develop. And I have a friend called Annie, who's a marine biologist and a filmmaker as well, and she told me this statistic that I think is particularly powerful. if you take 2 breaths right now, 2 deep breaths, the first of those comes from the ocean, and the second comes from forests. So
Nice.
it couldn't be more crucial. Orangutans are part of the very fabric of our lives, really, and our survival.
We'd be holding our breath without them.
Yeah, everything is so interlinked that it's So I'd say those are the major things, the roles they play in the ecosystems that they're in.
It's fascinating. I think it's important kind of breaking it down into those kind of things so people can process, because people naturally, instinctively, I think, are aware that, you know, there's value in all these organisms that are in these ecosystems, but it's not always clear kind of what it is, like what role do they play. They're building the nest. So they build these nests every day. Yeah,
they build them at sort of as the sun is going down, and a new one every single day. And the young.
Why don't they reuse them? Is that because they move around?
I think that generally, I've made my own sort of ideas about this. I'm sure there'll be papers about it, but I think health-wise, like, you don't risk of spreading parasites. Also, just the strength of it will probably be stronger on the first night, particularly as in the rainy season with the rain and things. So, yeah, there's a new one made every single day. And sometimes the males, if they're following a female, particularly a large dominant male, sometimes can be more of a sort of rushed effort. But generally speaking, these are you could sit in one and it would support your weight. I could sit in one, but they make a new one every day. And it's very interesting watching the young make play nests, but then later they will learn how to make proper ones.
So just trying to visualize this nest. So is it just you could visualize it as just a big bird nest that's kind of resting on a branch in a tree, or is it different? So, is it a different kind of nest?
Unlike bird nests where twigs are brought to the site, this is at the top, usually when 2 branches join, you know, like if you saw the shape of a Y, where these 2 branches join at the bottom, then all of the branches around it are broken at right angles, certain angles, there's a variety of angles, and then kind of weaved between each other to make it like a nest like that, if that makes sense.
Probably haven't explained. I think so.
So the branches all come from that area, that particular. If this is a tree trunk here, in the shape of a Y, and you imagine where 2 branches join, that joint is the base of the nest, or the location of the base of the nest, and then all of the branches that are coming up from around that get bent at certain angles so that they weave all around to form a cup nest like that.
I see. Well, and they do that every single day.
Yeah.
That's
they sort of rise, sunrise, and sleep for sunset. Quite a nice time.
Mm-hmm. How big do they get?
Well,
this big?
Again, not like chimpanzees, but with one of the fascinating things about orangutans is the difference. I find orangutans fascinating because they have a thing called, I'm probably going to say this wrong, bimaturism, which basically means adult male and females, sub-adults, males and females, look very similar. But then males go through this transformation, which varies with different ages of males, where they grow about 3 times the size. They turn into sort of a hulk, I suppose you could say. They grow these flanges, these cheek pads that come out like this throat pouch. They just quadruple their strength, and they then are the dominant male of that area. They do the long calls, and they're the ones that, with that dominance, tend to mate with the females as they go around. And they have a sort of, what would you call it, a range of about 2 kilometer radius. But there's no set age where they turn into these dominant males with the cheek pads. It really depends on the environment, and there's a lot of research that's going into it now to look at what these specific triggers are. So if I were to be able to show a photo of a subadult male, he could look quite similar to a female. But then at some point, they completely transform into these large flanged males. And so I would say, standing bipedally, they're about no taller than you or me, but their arms when stretched out are so long. And when you're surrounded by, when you're near a male dominant flanged male, I mean, even though they're maybe shorter than you, with the hair that comes down, with their massive body and the knowledge that they could, at a snap of their wrist, break your neck. The canines are almost the size of lions. They have a strength of a bite that's 4 times the strength of a lion's. Like all these things. I mean, just looking at their hand, the muscles they have in each digit just blows my mind. So they may not be bigger in terms of like tallness, but in presence,
physical presence,
they're big. They are big.
So it's crazy. So that change from kind of a normal sub-adult to where they grow. What do you call those?
So a cheek padder. You can call them a cheek padder, or the things that they have in their face. Those cheek pads. The word is flange.
Flange. So these flanges, that doesn't correlate to their age. It's triggered by the environment somehow. Triggered
by the environment, yes. So dominant male orangutans will do a long call. This happens maybe 5 times a day. It happens when I was there. It happened very, very, very early before sunrise. At sunrise, definitely one at sunset, and throughout the day there may be 1 or 2. And for the numerous times I heard these calls, they never ever lost they always stopped me in my path, I suppose you could say. That's probably not the right word, but it's the long call. It can go for even 10, 15 minutes sometimes. It starts with a sequence of sort of grumbles, and it builds up to this really loud booming thing, and then finishes with a kind of grumbling thing. And they can reach.
You nailed that.
That can travel through like 2 kilometers of the forest. This dense canopy, it can travel 2 kilometers. And that's kind of the male's message that he's boss.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a link between that and the subadult males, who still mate, but it's more kind of sneak matings and things. They run away when the dominant male comes along. They're very much subordinate. It is only at a certain time that the change happens, and they grow 3 times the size they are there.
Very interesting. So to keep on the physical characteristic kind of theme, these flanges, what's their kind of evolutionary purpose for them being there?
So if you think about the long calls, they kind of act as amplifiers, like speakers. Okay. I always think of the example, if you had a phone and you're playing music and you wanted to make it louder, you can put it in a cup. It's kind of like their face is one big cup this. And aside from that, just the look that they have, with this throat pouch that can inflate and things, and the hair grows so long on their arms, they just look quite formidable. It's interesting. Another thing, I mean, I've got a lot of things that are interesting about orangutans, but one that I find quite fascinating is that those male orangutans who are the dominant ones in that particular area actually prefer older females.
In terms of mating?
Yeah. They positively ignore often like young females who would be sort of throwing themselves on the male. They prefer. The most attractive thing is when an orangutan female has already had an offspring. She's already had an infant who's grown up healthy. But on that, I mean, I'm probably segueing a lot here, but one of the major things with orangutans is that their age, they have the longest time of sort of mother to infant care than any other mammal. So the young will stay with its mother for up to 8 years in Borneo. For the first 5 or so years, never ever leaving its mother's body.
Wow.
Not even. It would just learn how to move in conjunction with slight movements of the mother. It will then move, and it will not leave the mother's body for the first 5 years of its life. So that poses difficulty when it's a struggle with this long sort of life stage, because they don't have offspring very often, maybe once every 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So these the loss of population, that impact is amplified because the reproduction rate is lower.
Yes, but I would say orangutans as a species, 3 species, that's not the major issue. From my experience, it's not that the species is, it's not that the individuals are struggling, it's that there's just no space. Mm-hmm. There's nowhere, particularly when you think of these male orangutans, that when 2 dominant males come into contact, they'll fight. You can't have them in a close proximity. Each one needs their own 2 or so kilometer distance. So as the land is getting reduced and fragmented with palm oil and pulp and paper, there's nowhere to translocate or release these male orangutans. I think that is, it's not that the species is not really linked as much to the long life caring stage with the mother and the infant. It's more linked to the fact that there's just nowhere.
But I mean, the fact that it that reproduction thing is there's more time in between.
Yeah.
When the population decreases, it's like it'd be harder for them, because unlike another species where they just reproduce every, I don't know, a couple of years or so, there's 8 years in between. That's one thing about the palm oil. When I went to Borneo a couple of years ago with my mum, she's always loved orangutans, and that's been her thing, is wanting to go to Borneo and see them in the wild. So when my girlfriend and I were traveling around Southeast Asia back in 2017, she had to come back to Australia to do a uni exam. So when she was there for 3 weeks, my mum came over to Borneo, and we, the Malaysia part of Borneo, so at the top. And that was an incredible experience. But just the palm oil plantations and how that is bloody everywhere, and you drive down a road and you see them, and then you wake up and then they're still next to you out the window. It's just as far as the eye can see.
I know, it's devastating, and the weird, for me, this one of the freakiest parts is we used to have to drive through for 6-7 hours a palm oil plantation, and we'd get out. Sometimes people need to have a wee or something, and it was just silent. There's no noise, nothing, because there's nothing. There's an occasional rat or snake. There's nothing. And it's just so weird that you can be in an area that has trees. There's no building, or there's the mills and everything, but it's eerily quiet. And then you just see like a last bit of the peatland swamp forest, it's devastating.
So on those conservation threats, can you outline kind of what the main ones are? So habitat loss, like what are those threats?
For orangutans, the major threats are palm oil plantations and pulp and paper. And the threats here is that in order to grow this oil, the oil palm, the peatland swamp forests, the area, the habitat for these orangutans and the countless other species has to get cut down or burned down to then create the space to grow these oil palm. I'll get onto that whole problem of burning in a second, because that's a huge problem, not just for them, but for us. But another problem is that once the land is taken, these orangutans, which are now become sort of, their homes have been taken from them, they then appear as pests because there's nowhere for them to go. So they go to the villages, they're desperate for food, And that's when people react badly. That's when we've seen in the news these horrific incidences of orangutans that have been shot in the head 12 times or something like that. Another problem that they face is the pet trade that's still going on, where infants will be pulled off their mothers. Often, if the mother has been killed, the infant will be taken as a pet on the illegal pet trade, or taken and sold for in zoos or circuses. That still happens. There were some that were rescued from Thai boxing and things like that. Others that have had horrific stories. I remember going to a talk by Ian Singleton, who leads up at Sumatran SOCP. There was one that had been in a crate no bigger than its body for 30 years.
What?
Fed through a small hole. So, I mean, there are devastating stories, horrific things, but it's mainly habitat loss, habitat fragmentation due to palm oil, but also pulp and paper and viscose, the material that's in mainly in fast fashion rayon. In order to get viscose, you dissolve pulp, which comes from wood. So that's another thing that we just don't really know about, is that viscose that's not sustainably sourced is also contributing to this. And the other thing that I'd say that's coming out now more than ever, it's still kind of new, so I'm refraining from saying too much about it, but the reality that Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, is sinking. So there's going to have to, I won't say too much, but they will have to relocate Jakarta and all those people to another area in Indonesia as the capital sinks, and those billions of people need to be relocated to an area, which is a bit worrying.
That's a massive concern.
Yeah.
Is Jakarta coastal?
It suffers. Well, it's in Java, and it suffers every year
Floods.
with terrible flooding.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So nothing's been set in stone as to where the new Jakarta will be, but
that seems like a very complex.
Yeah.
It'll be a very complex process.
Yeah. There's a few proposed places, but until I know more, I probably will refrain from saying things in case it's fake news. No, not fake news. I mean, it is thinking. It is literally thinking. That is hard facts, but where the new Jakarta will be, it's not set in stone just yet. But wherever that is, I don't know. I mean, that's a big issue. Yeah, particularly if it's in an area where there's
land forests. Clearing, forests.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Having to locate the capital of Indonesia.
Yeah, I know. It's a big thing. Big thing.
So the palm oil plantation. So why is it such a bad thing for orangutans and the larger ecosystem? Is it purely just the deforestation? That is what it is, right? That's why it's a bad thing.
So probably I should say first is that it's an important thing to remember that palm oil is ironically an efficient oil. It takes up 10 times less land than other oil alternatives, but that is not the only thing to go by, and it's not sustainable in my eyes. One of the major problems with palm oil is the way that it is initially, well, as we said before, in order to create an area for a palm oil plantation, slash and burn fires happen to burn down this primary forest. And it's not even that deforestation that, even if you're not thinking about the orangutans, even if it's not that causes you to want to do something, even if it's not the deforestation. The problem is that often this habitat where they make where the palm oil plantations are set to be developed is on peatland swamp. And so peat, when all of the matter falls in a forest, it doesn't decompose. It just builds up and up and up and up and up. And the pressure pushes it down to create this peat that can be 5-6 meters deep. And when the slash and burn fires happen, that peat catches on fire for hours at a time. And that peat itself is like a store of tons of carbon. I mean, tons. And when the fires hit it, all of that carbon is then released into the atmosphere. So that's a terrifying problem. And the fires a few years ago in 2015, this is an interesting point that I like to think of that I actually put, that I'm talking about in a few days is, okay, so if you think about palm oil, yes, okay, you could say that it is a way for a poorer country to benefit economically from this land use change. But that's so short-sighted, because if you take the fires, for example, that cost the Indonesian Borneo, it cost Indonesian Borneo something like, wait, I've got it written down how much it cost. It cost $16 billion US, the effects of that fire. $16 billion. And I don't like comparing things to GDP because I think it's not the right calibration, but it was 1.8% of the GDP. So if you think that if we consider palm oil to be something that will benefit some, a country and economy, it's not black and white like that. It's so short-sighted to consider it like that. And when, that's what I'm trying to get at, really. So the carbon store on the peat, that's a huge one with the fires. And
the fires are there as part of the deforestation process. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And then so through that burning of that forest, that releases a lot of that carbon stored in the peat, which is that layer.
Yeah, it can be so deep. Yeah, it's all locked in carbon. So that's the big problem. That's not even related. That's not related to orangutans. That's related to climate change. Crisis.
Yeah. Crisis. Climate change. This kind of doesn't really do it justice, does it?
No.
So that brings me to my next point, which is kind of the positives, the solutions. What can we do as the general public to kind of help in some way?
Okay, so I think a major thing with this is to celebrate and to spread awareness of what people in the field are doing, because there's a lot that's going on with a lot of different organizations, and it's great to highlight this, to raise awareness of this. So take the issue of land first. The issue with that orangutans are having for land, when we were saying before about there's just no space. SOCP and Ian Singleton are developing these orangutan havens, which are kind of like large protected areas that have a board around them that orangutans can then be released into. And these tend to be the orangutans that can't be released back into the wild. For example, the male that was kept in a crate for 30 years, the level of trauma that he's gone through is unimaginable. But other things that are happening are incredible education things. So a huge thing is education, and the Orangutan Foundation International have education programs, and I know this is more related to sun bears, but KWPLH, led by Gabriella Fredrickson, has created this wonderful sun bear center where people are able to go in Balikpapan in Borneo and just enjoy nature and see these animals, and in a place where there maybe isn't that much connection with the wildlife around you. This is crucial. So education, the havens, Also, film, as we said before. So Red Ape, when Greenpeace did the orangutan with Mother, that I know some people said was controversial, but I mean the amount of people that went viral, the amount of people. I don't know if you saw it, the animation that Iceland wanted to use in their Christmas advert was created by Greenpeace and Mother.
I don't remember.
Well, I can send a link to you. There's a orangutan in my bedroom. That's the poem. It's an animation. Our Planet, the recent Netflix and Silverback documentary that was linked with WWF, that had an amazing sequence with orangutans. So film is a great way. But also when companies, for example, Lush, collaborate with others, so SOS, Sumatran Orangutan Society, and they created that soap, the orangutan soap, that they only had the amount of orangutans that were left in the wild. So when that soap was gone, it was symbolized how many were left. Artwork as well, you mentioned before, one of your previous podcast episodes. I'm probably going to say his name wrong, Ernest Zakarev, but he does these incredible, massive murals in Indonesia that showcase what's happening with the fires, with orangutans, with deforestation, with palm oil. So using art, collaborations with other businesses. So that's a lot that's going on. And also Cheryl Knott as well with orangutans. She is doing a lot of like community-based stuff. So providing alternative jobs and allowing, this is a crucial one that I haven't mentioned before, but allowing those people, Dayak people who own the land but have no proof of this because they don't have paperwork, helping them gain back their ownership of their ancient land. Really, their ownership to that land is crucial because they don't want the palm oil plantations, but often they don't have the tangible evidence to prove that it's theirs.
Yeah, okay.
Well, so that's probably another thing for another time. I'm just bombarding you things here, but
that brings up a totally important point, though.
Tim Lehman, together they have been doing some amazing community-based things. But for us, I think there are a few things that I would like to address because it is maybe slightly more complicated than we said before, like plastic pollution, but there are things that we can do. And the first is to push as a consumer for transparency, whether that's with palm oil, whether that's with fast fashion, pressurizing the brands and the companies that we use to be more transparent about where they're sourcing palm oil from and what policies they have in place to address deforestation with their commodities is so important. And it's been really rubbish over the last few years.
So on that,
what I mean by that,
what do you mean?
So what I mean is, I would say there are a number of major companies that supply commodities in the world. So whether that's Nestle, Dorito, Unilever, Marks and Spencers, any big corporation. Commodities, certain commodities are linked to tropical deforestation. So obviously palm oil, but you've also got cattle, soy, pulp and paper, and timber. And with these commodities, if a company is using or supplying those commodities, what policies are there in place that show that that company is trying to push forward with zero deforestation and probably not explain this very well. What impact is that are they having on deforestation? Mm-hmm. And a great way, what's happened with this is that a think tank called Global Canopy Program have created something which is called Forest 500, which I'm making a little film about tomorrow, actually. And what this does is this is on a website that we can access online, and it has an annual assessment of the 500 biggest companies that have the most influence in tropical deforestation through supplying all of those commodities that I listed before. And us as consumers, we can go on that and say, okay, well, I shop with blah, blah, or I use this. and it ranks them with 5 different rankings on how they're addressing deforestation that they're linked to, that they're responsible for. So it really calls them out on these things, and we can see how they're doing. And in the past, it was just kind of ranked on whether they had policies or whether they didn't. But now it's ranked on whether they have policies and whether they've put stuff in place to allow these policies to happen, what they're doing to make these policies go ahead. Because in the past, being RSPO labeled as sustainable has many cracks in it, because there was no proof that these policies were actually being put in place with sort of time-bound commitments and things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's
that
a big
website. What was that website called?
Forest 500. Forest 500.
Okay, so someone can hop on that website, and there will be information of these companies, businesses.
Yeah, so you can go on and you can be like, right, well, I really like Nestle, which is bad. I hope you don't. But I want to check out how Nestle is doing. They go on, they see, oh my God, they are doing, we could look at it. I'll put a little demo on a film tomorrow. But fortunately, it's something like in the 2018 report, 40% of companies had no policies, which is not good.
Mm-hmm.
But the good thing is that of the commodities, palm oil is the one that is most focused on. So I would say quite a complicated way of saying it, but as a consumer, know that you have a voice, and know that with your voice, you can pressure people to have transparency.
100%.
And the other things are just, what else can we do? I really strongly believe that living a low impact, sustainable, plant-based lifestyle is huge. And as we said before, obviously switching one oil for the other has limitations, but the more that you do eat locally, sustainably, plant-based, you see that actually you don't consume foods that have these oils in. Processed foods have the oils in, and sort of things like that tend to have palm oil in, but when you're cooking fresh, and often these things, there are hundreds of recipes now that show you can do it far quicker, far cheaper, and it doesn't tend to have these products. Even shampoo bars and like more eco-friendly clothes washes.
Mm-hmm.
These things don't have. I'm going for more of a holistic approach to things. You cut
which
out
is the right approach.
Yes.
Long term.
Yes, and you're cutting out palm oil, and you're not even substituting it for another oil that the argument is takes up more land. You're just cutting it out, and it's not even feeling like you're boycotting it. You're just, through changing your lifestyle in these little shifts, it's benefiting the environment, it's benefiting orangutans, but it's also benefiting your health. Palm oil is not good for us. It's really not good for us. So I think, yes, your lifestyle plays a huge role, and every one of us can do something about that. And spreading the word, using social media in positive ways, creating little films with your phone. You can get free editing apps. We've seen the power of these films and these animations, and spreading the word and connecting with people on recipes and things to do is a really powerful way. We have the information in a click of our hand on Ecosia rather than Google search. And yeah, to feel empowered, not deflated.
That point that you touched on with kind of acknowledging that we have a voice, I think is critical, because I saw a meme the other day. It was about plastic pollution in the oceans, and it said me kind of using a single-use plastic. Oh no, what does it say? So there's a meme, and it said, my action doesn't matter, my individual action doesn't matter, says 8 billion people. Something along those lines. But the whole idea is there's this...
just one straw said...
that was it. It was just one straw says 8 billion people. Yeah. And it's this mentality that, my individual action has no power. There's no substance to it. But people don't are not aware that, every individual action doesn't act in isolation. There's a ripple on effect. And
Yeah. Well, I think it's even just looking in the UK now, the amount of restaurants that have at least one vegan option, the success of the Extinction Rebellion, peaceful protests in the UK and Ireland announcing a climate crisis, the fact that the protests about the Tapanuli orangutan pressured the Bank of China to halt the development. I mean, the letters that every child, every one of them wrote was read. And I think that, as you said, everyone plays a role, everyone has a voice, so use that voice well and find the things that people connect to. If it's not the orangutans, think of the air that you breathe and you want your children to breathe. It's about, everything is so interlinked that we've become into this fast demand lifestyle where we expect a meal to be cooked in the microwave in 4 seconds. Not 4 seconds, probably takes longer, but yes, that's going to have
it's just
palm
quick,
oil.
quick.
Not going to be good for your health, but there are heaps of things that I'm still learning from the internet, from books, from friends about tips and tricks for low impact, more sustainable lifestyle. And it's all there. The information's there for us to learn, and for it's a community feel. We just got to give it a go.
We do have to give it a go. And we as consumers have the power, and all these businesses, when it boils down to it, in essence, they all operate off supply and demand. So when we purchase a product or a service that has a unethical process, we are effectively demanding those businesses involved to continue to supply that product to us. So if we choose to reject that product, over time, the supply will decrease because the demand is decreased. So, it's not always easy to see how these small actions, kind of the impact that it's having, but we need to kind of consider a time frame, and these changes take time. And it's not like you'll wake up tomorrow morning and all the plastic's got to be out of the ocean, or palm oil plantations are non-existent. It's a gradual process, but it comes down to us as consumers choosing wisely and rejecting the things that are bad for our planet, and
pressurizing those in power to prioritize conservation and biodiversity. Because until that's a priority,
how do you pressurize that? How do you do that?
I think writing, demanding transparency. The Forest 500 website is a great way that has pressurized them, because it's open to the public. Everyone can see exactly how they're doing. Nothing can be hidden anymore. And I think that the more that we pressurize them in forms of communication, the more they can't ignore it. I'd say there was something else I was going to say on that matter. Two slightly less specific things, but I really think people as much as they can to push those STEM subjects for the younger generations to carry on with science and technology and engineering and mathematics, because that's so crucial. And to, again, with that younger generation, really empower them, because it can be a difficult time. I mean, with the climate sort of anxiety that people, the sort of feeling that people have, especially that I've got younger siblings, and it's tough because it's always on their mind the whole time. And I've also volunteered with a number of 12 to 16-year-olds with Action for Conservation and spoke to them. And it's a lot to take on, a lot with exams and this and that, but for people to feel involved, then when you come together and unite, then you pressure together the corporations that have this potential to really halt or at least drastically reduce deforestation. It's got to there's got to be change. Mm-hmm. And whilst that's happening, what we can all do as well is so important. But putting that pressure and then realizing that change needs to happen, and it needs to happen fast. It's not about not meeting 2020 deforestation thing. And things need to happen now.
Things do need to happen now. How do we how do we kind of combine our forces? What can you recommend? Any like online resources or groups that kind of foster that collaboration?
Yeah, I think so. If people listening have a particular interest with orangutans, there are a number of volunteering things that they can do, both out in Borneo and also in any, actually across the globe. I know that Orangutan Foundation International have a annual construction volunteers 3-week thing, like not an internship, like you go and you help construct a boardwalk or a part of the something within the forest. Or if you want to do something more sort of locally to where you're living, I mean, fundraising is a huge thing, and many of these organizations have ways that you can do anything and fundraise for them. Or you can join forces with other people and fundraise together. I mean, there are a number of groups that people can join. Extinction Rebellion, they have them in many, many different countries, and that comes together, and you can be more focused on the science things and biodiversity issues rather than, you don't have to always do the activism. There are many different avenues of Extinction Rebellion, and just keeping the conversations going, really, like striking conversations, making content, organizing talks, going to talks, emailing people who are, like, often people will get back to you. I know, particularly within filmmaking, many of the people in production that I've always been in awe of their work, they'll meet you for a coffee. Just got to keep trying. I would say within each place, find like sustainability groups. Volunteering as well is huge. I found the trajectory that I've been on now, from loving orangutans to having a career, and for the last few years really honing in on also looking at it professionally, all stem from volunteering. Those years ago. I like that without a shadow of doubt, that's how I've got to where I've got to now. So I can't recommend volunteering enough. And if there isn't a group available, make one, I'd say. Yeah. That's
a very good point. We live in this internet age where we have that power. We can create a group on Facebook, on Instagram, on any social platform, and we can start reaching out to people and trying to harness that power. We can literally do that now.
And the two, so I just remember two other, so the ones that I'm involved with, just if this helps. So there's Ape Alliance, run by Ian Redmond. So Ape Alliance is based in Bristol, but that's worldwide. And that focuses on all of the great apes. That's who I did the Tapanuli protest with. And there are multiple talks that happen. That's a really great one to look up. And they also on the website show many different volunteering opportunities and ways you can get involved. And then Action for Conservation basically gets young adults engaged and involved with conservation. And then your local wildlife trust. I know in the UK they have many different wildlife trusts, but around the whole world there'll be different little groups. It's just about having a search, I'd say.
Having a little...
and finding one.
What's your Google alternative?
Search. Ecosia.
So we just need to do a Ecosia search and find those groups.
Choose with every search.
There's a lot to digest, but we need to stay optimistic, and with the power of the internet, that's kind of my thesis is how can we use this online platform that we have most of us have access to for good, because we know it has the power to take a lot of things viral. It has the power to influence elections potentially in the United States via Russia, whatever. But it has a lot of potential. There's a lot of power there if we just harness it correctly, and we can start a little Instagram awareness page on Instagram and create content. We don't even have to create content. We can share other people's content, and that is your content. So if you're not a creator, if you're not a filmmaker or a painter, you can document your content. You don't even have to create, or you can repost other people's content. We can all contribute to that awareness part, at least.
And even taking Greta, I love what Greta said, Greta Thunberg, about, she's a schoolgirl who just decided to stop going to school. And if one person deciding to not go to school has had this impact, it just shows what each one of us can have. I mean, she's a true inspiration for me. And I think that's just a perfect example, is find what you can do and just have hope. I know she says, I don't want you to have hope, I want you to panic. But I think you got to have hope. You got to have hope. Otherwise, we've got to have hope, and we've got to...
I think you need hope. You need this belief that we can achieve this.
Yeah.
We have to have this belief or hope that we can achieve this. Otherwise, it deter a lot of people anyway if they can't visualize that end goal.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to, I guess, kids growing up into adults too quickly and not realizing that there's a lot of different ways that we can live our life. It's not just the one that they teach us in primary school and high school. There's many different pathways out there, and through the internet we can literally do what we want to do, as long as that's mapped to hard work and skill to some degree. We can do what we want and make a living out of it. And my purpose at the moment is trying to find my purpose, and how I define that is trying to find something that I'm good at, trying to find something that I'm passionate about, trying to find something that can make me money, and something that can add value to the world. So the intersection of those 4 points, I think, is the definition of purpose, well, at least in my book. And if people can use their curiosity or think deeply about what those things are, we can actually achieve those things. If we attempt to achieve that purpose and we're 35, 40, and we realize at that point maybe we got it wrong, you're 40 years old, you can do something else. Like it's still, like, people are deterred with the idea of failure and trying something new because of failure and how they feel they would be perceived by other people. But it really doesn't matter. Like, you need to do what you feel is best for you and for the collective well-being of the planet, and just do it and keep doing it, keep trialing, experimenting and testing, and just keep doing it. And if you fail, that's just part of the journey, but just keep doing it. We've been talking. Okay.
Another thing I was going to say on that is having that connection with nature, because as we said right at the start, like, if you don't experience things, it's very hard to care. And particularly over the last year or so, I've been trying to take a far more holistic approach to things. So before, it was always like, well, it's actually quite interesting and quite easy to link it with a plant-based low impact, or trying to be low impact lifestyle. And just by using things like essential oils, or trying to not growing my own things and this and that, it's such a amazing way to connect with the world around us, because you use something that's plant-based and you see the power that it's had, really seriously, not placebo, genuinely power that it's had, and you're just in awe of the natural world. And in turn, that will make you connect to it and want to protect it.
That's a real thing. Biophilia, like humans have this innate desire to be close to nature, and they've done many tests and experiments where even in the office space in the city, if an office where there's plants or greenery in the office is more productive than an office space without that greenery and plantation. We just work better when we are closer with the natural world, and there doesn't need to be this disconnect, and we're better off if we are more connected. It's not like it's a trade-off where if we're with nature we lose these other things. If we're with nature, we actually gain a shitload of stuff as well. Yeah, even the planting your own stuff. I recently bought some plants that are out on my balcony. I'm in Brisbane at the moment, kind of. I'm looking at the city now, but we've got a little balcony here, and we've got a couple of chili plants, tomatoes, passion fruit. This is even that, just having that, and it's like watering them each day, and it's kind of lame, just sitting down on the couch and just hanging out with your green friends.
That is fantastic. We've got a lot of time for that. I'm the same.
Yeah. So I think that desire, that is in all of us. We just need to tap into that. And the challenge is kind of what can we do to tap into that? Whether that's through storytelling or facts or whatever. It is in every human being, that desire to be close to nature and to want to protect nature. But we just need to, I think people just just disconnected from that fact. We've been chatting for about an hour and 25 minutes. I don't know, kind of, there's a couple of questions I want to say before we go, and is that cool with you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So there are kind of two closing questions. So before I go to those, is there any topics that you want to touch on that we haven't touched on at the moment? Anything you kind of want to talk about?
I think there was only something really, I don't know if you were planning on asking this, but just about like a certain thing with orangutans, because there's something that I find so, like, aside from all of the other amazing things that we've spoken about, there's a couple of two sort of things that I think is quite cool to mention.
Right,
three.
Tell me these three cool things.
Okay, so the first is that, remember we were talking before about when a dominant male, how big he is.
Yeah.
The woman that I used to work with, Brute Galdikas, once saw a male orangutan hanging from a branch, 2 fingers, just 2 fingers, his entire body weight. And then for a few seconds, he was just with 1 finger. And so that is one thing that's blown my mind. The second thing that's blown my mind that's very current is that recently a paper came out that's very controversial. And some people, say it's got a bit of, it's controversial, but it needed to be acknowledged, it needed to be aired, is that in fact, humans are more closely related to orangutans than they are to chimpanzees.
I read that article.
Yeah, so not based on genetics, but based on physical
characteristics. Yeah, I was gonna ask you that actually.
Really, I jumped the gun, but that's really fun. I like that a lot. Obviously, I like that a lot.
But it's a fairly controversial thing, right? Like,
yeah,
it's kind of a big jump to say they're our closest relative. Yeah. Based on what they look like. I think
physically it's fascinating. So the fact that many other characteristics that were considered just human. So the fact that we have a hole, like a sort of hole on the top roof of our mouths. We have a hairline. Not a hole, like a kind of, say a hole, like a bit on the roof of our mouths. Mm-hmm. Was before considered a solely human trait, but orangutans have that. Hairline, orangutans have that. And actually, it turned out that humans share 28 similarities with orangutans, but they share 2 with chimpanzees, and they share 7 with gorillas. So that's quite a big jump.
So what would that suggest? Would that mean that?
Well, it's sort of one of the reasons it's controversial is because it as it stands, the human evolution. It is acknowledged that humans, originated in Africa, right? Mm-hmm. But orangutans came from Southeast Asia, so it doesn't really. There's a lot of confusing bits there. It goes against what we know for human evolution. Yeah. But I mean, it's an interesting thing, one to be acknowledged. But totally. Yeah. And then my third thing was, maybe this is something that you were going to ask in a closing thing. Were you going to ask me any more things about orangutans?
I was going to say, how are orangutans and humans similar?
Oh, I kind of answered that. Whoops.
So, and the last one was, the closing question was going to be, what makes orangutans special to you?
Okay, well, I can probably link this to all of those that above.
Okay.
That's probably a good thing to end on. So, there are a lot of things that make humans and orangutans similar. Emotions. We've seen like physical characteristics. But one thing that I've always found so intriguing about orangutans, and something that has always stuck with me from spending time with wild orangutans, from studying them, from filming with them, is the fact that unlike gorillas, unlike bonobos, unlike chimpanzees, orangutans are semi-solitary, so they spend the vast majority of their lives alone or with their young. They still have encounters with other orangutans, and the infants can play and things like that. But when I think of orangutans and having orangutans as friends, even observing them or studying them, the way they are with humans, the way they are in their environment, is so fascinating in the sense that they don't need to continuously reaffirm or prove friendships. If one trusts you, the way that you know is that it's let you go close and it hasn't bitten off your hand. It's so effortless, the little glimmer of acceptance, that it looks as if it's kind of almost by mistake. But you know that you don't need to constantly prove this friendship. It's just there. It's so subtle, but so genuine, that it's something that I've tried to really think about with friendships with humans. I mean, you can learn so much from not only our similarities, but our differences with orangutans. And the way that they stare into your eyes, an blinking gaze for 20 seconds at a time, honestly is just the most all-absorbing thing I've ever encountered in my whole life. But they don't need to stroke you, they don't need to groom you. It's just so much is said in that moment that I'm probably not explaining it very well. It's more the
sounds pretty powerful.
And the way that they don't, it's just kind of, they don't need us, they don't care about us, but there's a deep connection that's kind of based on just being in each other's presence that I find very mesmerizing. Yeah, I think that's...
So it's like they don't need you.
Yeah.
But there's this like acknowledgement that we're both here.
Yeah. And yeah, it's something about that. Like they're just
it's that acknowledgement. I think even that acknowledgement alone is important. I think we go about our business every day without even the acknowledgement of other human beings or anything. And I think just that simple act of acknowledgement speaks volumes.
Or even just the fact that, we're always, so many societal pressures say, thank you, or be polite, or are you sure, like reaffirm this, affirm that, like where do we stand as friends, like with orangutans, that none of that happens. It's so
authentic.
It's kind of like you just know. If you get on with an orangutan, you get on with the orangutan. It's never going to change. Even if you don't see it for 6-7 years, it will never change. But you don't need, if it was a human, you don't need to WhatsApp every Friday to make sure they haven't forgotten about you. It's done. If that connection's there, it's there. Permanent. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to keep it going. It's done. It's gone. It's not gone. It's forged. It's literally there. And you don't need to prove it. You don't need to constantly check. it's there, and that
It's almost
to me
like
is,
this
I love
trust thing. It's
it.
like just through that eye contact, there's this acknowledgement. There's this just trust. You're like, I know. I guess with some humans, it's, you know, people may say one thing, but that isn't always the intention, or there's something else to it. There's it's hard to always trust, or I don't know what I'm really trying to say. I think I know what you're talking about. I'm just trying to put myself in that situation and kind of visualize it and imagine how I'd feel in that situation.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, we've got a whole heap of similarities, humans and orangutans. But the major thing that okay, I've got it. Major thing that separates us to orangutans is that orangutans are totally and utterly content in their own presence, their whole lives.
Yes.
They don't.
Yes.
And they interact. Of course, they interact, and they enjoy interactions. You've seen young play, and then the bond between a mother and an infant is like nothing else. But they don't need to prove that relationship. They don't. If two orangutans that have met a few months ago, a certain fruiting tree that seems to be in fruiting at that time, they may not see each other for 2 months, and then they'll go to a tree. They may not even, go, and they're not going to groom each other, but they just know. It's just they know that where they stand with the other, and they're so totally okay in their own company, because in my eyes, I feel like their company is the forest. Going back to that whole thing that triggered me at the start with the putting the thing back on the branch, their troop, their family is the forest.
Kind of feel like I'm a bit of an orangutan.
We all are.
I'm a bit of an introvert, and I can kind of be by myself for forever. But it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's almost as if one way to look at it for me is they don't need to kind of prove themselves to like their emotions or anything. It is what it is, but there's nothing to gain from proving something, or like the thing that you're saying about what were you saying about them not needing to reaffirm themselves or prove? Yeah.
They don't need to.
It's
they
like
don't need to prove their friendship. If they've got a connection, it's just there.
Yeah. And one way that I look at it is from my own personal experiences. I'm pretending I'm an orangutan right now. Is there's nothing from a practical perspective. There's nothing to gain from trying to prove that. With me, I try to whatever I do, trying to see if there's value in doing that, and if there isn't, I try not do that thing. And there's nothing to gain from trying to prove that. Like you don't gain anything, they don't gain anything. So what's the point in doing it? So in that sense, they're like an emotional minimalist.
Yeah.
Like their minimalism extends beyond just kind of their consumption. It's kind of their output of emotions.
Yeah. And maybe I see it as like, instead of having, like if there was a root with all the different bonds within a troop, because they have this bond with this person in the troop and this one, they don't have troops because they're semi-solitary. But if you compare to a chimpanzee or something, like they have not weird, wonderful, but allies and little tricks going on. With an orangutan, instead of having loads of different roots, it's just one root that goes down deep. That is a deep old root. That connection is just one fat, deep rooted connection, and no matter of wind or rain, nothing is going to blow that over. But you don't need to keep checking it. It's going to be probably doesn't explain well. I'm quite a weirdly visual person, but
I'm visualizing that right now.
Yeah, you've got a friend. If you connect with an orangutan, and that orangutan was actually a human, even if you didn't see each other for 5 years, you don't need to send them a WhatsApp to make sure that they're not annoyed that you haven't spoken, because they know that the connection you have is so deep that when you do get to see each other again, it's there and it never falters.
It's like they're aware of they find that comfort or that reassurance in being aware of their role in their environment, in their ecosystem. They're aware that while they're there, their purpose or their individual purpose and how that ties in with the collective purpose. When you are aware of that, everything else almost doesn't matter, because you can always revert back to why you're here. And if you have clarity in what that is, then you can be at peace. You can always find peace in what you do, as long as that aligns with that purpose. And all these other things about kind of trying to prove something or to someone else, it doesn't matter, because you know why you did what you did and you know why you're here. So everything else doesn't really matter. And the whole deep rooted thing with that, they're a deep rooted tree. So they depth over width.
Yeah.
Their tree goes deep down, taps deep down into the reservoir below, as opposed to one that kind of shallow and then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Learn a lot about us from them.
Pardon?
We can learn a lot about us from them.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah.
We, when I was in architecture school, actually funny story. So, I studied architecture, and that's, shout out to Bianca. She actually got me on, just like, you should head up Daya, you know, Bianca. Yeah. I went to uni with her in Perth.
Oh my gosh.
And
she's studying at the moment with Annie, the girl that
Iceland.
With the breath thing that I said, one in the oceans, one in the forest.
Oh, is that her?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw her in one of her videos on Instagram story, because she's there in Iceland doing that orca. And orcas are my favorite animal. So I messaged her. I was like, I can't wait to see your videos. I'm jealous. Yeah. But anyways, when I was in architecture school, I've always loved animals and the environment, and like always since I was a young kid. And in architecture school, I was like, I don't know if this is right for me, doing this whole architecture build environment thing. And I was halfway through, I was contemplating dropping out and doing wildlife filmmaking. And there was Otago University in New Zealand. I did research into their course. Apparently it was pretty good. And I was that close to dropping out and doing that because I wanted a career that was associated in some way with animals and having a positive impact. And wildlife filmmaking was the only thing that I could kind of was the only career that I was aware of through David Attenborough and all those docos. I was like, okay, that's the only one. But my family and friends convinced me to stick it out with architecture. And now I'm here, 27. Got my birthday in a couple of days.
Oh, nice.
Kind of gone full circle. So I'm no longer passionate about the built environment. It's gone to the kind of the natural environment and giving that a go, which is kind of tricky to do, especially after you've invested all this time and money into a university degree. And kind of at the end of it being like, I'm going to try something else, especially if that thing is conservation. It's like, what the heck are you doing? Like, I'm like, okay, what are you doing, son? What are you? Okay, but what are you really doing?
No, you carry on. I'll say the thing after.
So yeah, that is funny that I've kind of gone through that process, and despite that, I'm reverting back to what my gut feeling was at the beginning, and trusting that gut. And yeah, it's interesting how that kind of pans out. I think people should trust their gut more.
Yeah,
we live in a day and age where we can, reverting back to what I was saying before, like we can live a more tailor-made lifestyle if we choose to and put in the effort and work and that kind of stuff.
It's interesting though, because when we're talking about solutions and what we can do and what's powerful, even your knowledge of architecture will have a benefit for getting a message across. Like, to think that a fashion brand, a television program, Lacoste t-shirts, when they changed the logo to endangered species, like, all the more ways that you can combine subjects together, the more powerful the spread of the message will be. It will hit more people. So I think never see like those studies as a time that's unrelated, because everything is related. Like, even the way that you'd be able to tap into, and like, it's not about preaching to the converted. It's about getting the people that may not have thought about it before, not only like thinking about it, but that they care, that they can relate. So yeah, I think that's a good thing to remember.
Yeah, and I definitely don't regret that process. I think what drew me to architecture in the first place was I've always loved to think. I've always been a bit of a daydreamer in that sense, and architecture was one where you're thinking a lot. You're thinking about an idea, thinking about a concept, and then developing that concept. And that's, I guess, a skill that is transferable to anything. If you can if you can learn how to think about a concept and develop it, everything in the world begins with an idea and a concept. So that's the biggest takeaway that I got from architecture, was kind of going through that process and learning how I personally think of a concept and how I personally would develop that given my personal skill set.
Yeah.
So was the takeaway. But I mentioned that architecture thing because in architecture, one of my projects was I was designing it was like a apartment, restaurant, office, hybrid building or whatever. And I used, there was biomimicry, biomimicry.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And it was on the leaf cutter ants. And the whole process of how they bring in the leaves, and then, that kind of breaks down and feeds the fungus or whatever, creates fungus, and then their larvae eat on that fungus. But it's like a symbiotic relationship with everything, and it's all interconnected. But yeah, biomimicry and the idea of learning from nature is really important, because Mother Nature has been engineering for millions and millions of years, and to think that we can engineer a better product in one generation is kind of a bit ridiculous. We should look to someone that's been doing it for far longer than we have. Seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It was spoken about in this podcast. I wish I could remember the name of the podcast. It's a Goop podcast, and it was about I can't remember. It was such a good. It was called Shifting from. You know what? I'm just going to find it quickly. It was really fantastic, talking about curiosity and looking at nature, and how to move from consumer to citizen.
Consumer to citizen.
It's good. It's a good one.
Okay, this is officially my longest podcast so far. Just beat my last record of an hour and 44.
Maybe they just get longer and longer.
Yeah, well, they're pretty long. We kind of, the last one when I spoke to Angelo about painter dogs, we just yarn back and forth, and it's great.
Well, there's always a lot to talk about, and it's good because usually if I'll be like with friends, somehow I always manage to get the conversation back on orangutans, and it's probably become slightly boring. Not boring, but like predictable. Oh, dare not have orangutans again, and I am. So, this is a great moment. I've been able to talk again about orangutans. It's fantastic, and discuss it and talk about solutions, and not just the sort of worrying times, but what we can actually do together.
So we're probably going to be chatting for a couple more minutes longer, but an interesting point that my previous guest was saying, how if we speak for this long, obviously I'm interested and there's a handful of people that'd be interested, but having creating or curating a piece of content in a way, or packaging a piece of content in a way that the general public would be likely to consume. So one thing I'm trying to do is the condensed IGTV recap video, which is I go through this podcast, so I'm recording the video as well, and I'm breaking that down into a 9:16 format video on IGTV, breaking down kind of like cool sections throughout the podcast with captions and titles and a little progress bar at the bottom, but trying to deliver it in a way that people consume currently. So I believe in what we're trying to do, I believe, is a good message. We're trying to tell a good story, but that's only one part of the equation. The second part of the equation is to distribute that message to the world. Otherwise, the story won't be heard. And everyone's at the moment is their attention's on their phone. So you need to kind of come up with a content plan that will enable your story to be put in front of the eyes and ears of everyone else out in the world. And at the moment it's on the phone. So I'm trying to experiment with how I can curate this content in a way that people would actually consume it, because everyone's got a short attention span these days. And if you don't grab their attention, even to the point of a thumbnail, you could have the best story in the world. You could make the best film in the world. But if you don't have an eye-catching thumbnail on your Instagram grid thumbnail or your YouTube thumbnail, they're not going to click it.
I know.
And these things all need to be considered, and it's like a whole nother dimension, but I would argue is one of the most critical parts at the moment is, I'd go as far to say that with conservation is you need to create a bloody good clickable thumbnail.
Yeah.
Or else you're not going to do anything. And that doesn't sound natural, but unfortunately it's like, in my opinion, critical to the day and age that we're living in at the moment, which is part of all the things that I'm trying to figure out with online and social media, and going a bit of a rant on that one.
Well, it was interesting. I would just say on that, when I was doing the volunteering with Action for Conservation, we looked at a series of videos and conservation clips, some longer than others, and the one that unanimously was the most popular with these 12 to 16-year-olds was a 1 minute, not animation, but just like illustrations, simple illustrations of George Monbiot talking about rewilding. 1 minute, just very simple, not too sort of doom and gloom, but also not overly optimistic. It just laid out the facts. If we do this, this will happen. Done. That is it. And it wasn't busy. It was just so clear. And I think you're exactly right. You're tapping into it. It's a fast, people look at things on the bus. They don't sit down and really have time to, if it doesn't catch your attention now, it won't, and they'll switch to something else. So it's about tapping into different audiences in different ways and using social media for positive ways that it can be used in connecting people across the world and in a matter of seconds, rather than focusing on its bad traits, which it does have.
It definitely does have, yeah. But bad traits or not, it's the reality of the consumer at the moment. So we need to kind of almost present it to them in a way that they want to consume it. Even as far as to say, like the videos, like a vertical video versus a horizontal video, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
In itself, like the idea that we're on our phones. A phone is this vertical screen. Therefore, a vertical video will take up more real estate on that screen. Therefore, they're more likely to engage with it because as they're scrolling, it's going to stay on the screen for a longer period of time. Those things blow my mind because, a good message, a good story, it needs to be backed up with the nuances of the platform that you're posting on and that kind of stuff, and the audience specific to that platform. Yeah, it's crazy. There's a lot of nuances to consider, I feel like, in terms of creating content and delivering content in order to sway someone's opinion. They're all important things. Okay, so finish off on the last question.
Okay,
which is you touched on that one, didn't you? The what makes orangutan special to you?
Yeah.
You touched on that, yeah. Okay, so I think we might be done.
Wow.
Well, we should go for an extra 3.5 minutes so it can just be 2 hours.
A few things. If people do want to know any more, I created a film last year back at the place. It's the most beautiful place I've ever been in my whole life. I don't think I'll ever be. I mean, there are beautiful places, but this, hands down, it's unforgettable. And I was able to make a film with the Orangutan Foundation International that showcased like a crazy relationship between a man and an orangutan, a male orangutan. There's big ones that we were talking about before. And yeah, if anyone did want to watch that, that's on YouTube and Vimeo, but YouTube is probably easier. Which I'm sure, it's called The Lost Person of the Forest, and you can find it that way. And otherwise, all the other incredible documentaries that are out are ones to watch. And if anyone did have any questions, they can always pass them on to you and pass them on to me, because, as I said, I can carry on talking and discussing if there's anything that you know that you want to share. I'm always wanting to learn more. Mm-hmm. So to get in touch, I would urge people, keep the conversation going.
Definitely, especially when we can so easily contact one another. These days, there's really no excuse not to try, at least.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, for your 2 hours. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
It's been really great.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. And best of luck with your film and your poem.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I'll be recording that tomorrow, so I'll share that.
Yeah, look forward to hearing it.
Okay, it might be awful. It could be, you know what? At the end of the day, I was saying it.
Just do it.
Yesterday, I was saying this to my boyfriend. Even if everyone thinks it's rubbish, I think it's nice. So no, I don't think it's nice. I think it's great, and that's all that matters when you create something.
Yeah, who cares what people think? What you're doing is something that's positive and good for the world, and as long as you can remind yourself of that, then everything else doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Just like the orangutan. I'd love to catch up again in the future for maybe another chat and
an update.
Yeah. Do you know of, because you're obviously involved with the space, and do you know of anyone that would potentially would love to chat about issues like not necessarily orangutans, but related people doing similar work in the field?
Or linked to...
Or just other people like yourself and myself that...
A lot of people. I feel like I could send you a list of a few people that would be really interesting to have on board to provide different insights and experience and stories and things. So maybe I can message their handles.
Message me the handles.
Definitely.
I'll reach out to them because I want to try and this whole idea with the conservation tribe is to try and build a tribe of people that are working towards the same goal. And it's not purely just researchers and scientists, it's everyone that is wanting to contribute. So artists, even I'm thinking of doing podcasts with a bloke in America who started he's like myself. I'm an architect. I'm not a zoologist or biologist. I'm just love animals. But he's in a similar boat, and his side hustle is he started a Instagram page dedicated to raising awareness for the pangolin.
Wow. Yeah.
And even just that idea, like I think that's really important. To me, it's kind of like a mini conservation organization. It's one that's dedicated. It's lightweight, and it's lightweight and it's fast, as opposed to the traditional charity where it's obviously doing great work, but it's harder to establish. It's heavy, and it's heavy, and it's, I guess, slower. It's slower because it's doing important, like massive stuff. But a Instagram page where it's the entry is easy. Just create an account and you can actually do work. So I want to chat to him about why he started that, and hopefully inspire other people to get on board and start a page dedicated to a topic that they're passionate about, and raising awareness, but then also trying to mitigate the fake news, because that's another issue. But that's another topic, is trying to figure out how we can avoid fake news and establishing reliable sources for information. But yes, we've made it past 2 hours. So thank you again. And
thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I will maybe I'll create a Dropbox share folder with you, and the audio and the videos and whatnot I can chuck on there. And moving forward, if we want to send each other stuff, we've got a share Dropbox folder, so we can easily do that. Cool.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yay! Well, have a lovely rest of your day. I don't know what time it is. I feel like it's the morning.
No, it's 2:20 in the afternoon. Yeah.
And you're a whole day ahead of me. That's always weird.
Yeah, I'm ahead of you. It's so bizarre.
Oh, so weird.
Yeah.
You're Thursday, right?
Huh?
You're on Thursday.
Thursday. Yes, Thursday. You're Wednesday night.
It's so weird.
Yeah, it's one thing I'm definitely like. The time zone difference with us is actually pretty decent, but some of them it's like really tricky. So it's because I don't have a good lighting setup or whatever. I try and do it so that I'm recording my daytime, so I get sunlight.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's really tricky to do that with people's time zones, and it's literally my daytime's 3 a.m. or whatever. So it's tricky.
My God.
We make it work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's been really great chatting. And I'll message you probably tomorrow with the contact details of other people. That could be good.
Totally. Okay. Thank you. And nice meeting you virtually.
Yeah, you too.
And best luck with everything, and I'll chat to you later.
Okay. Bye.
Right. Bye.